There was once a man who could read any language on Earth. He understood physics, he understood medicine, he understood music theory, ancient history, Eastern philosophy, and the mathematics of light. He wasn't a legend, he wasn't a myth, he was a real person, born in London in 1773, and by the time he was 14 years old, most people who met him genuinely believed he knew everything. His name was Thomas Young, and he might have been the last human being on the planet who actually could, because something happened in the century after he died, something that didn't make headlines, something that nobody announced or decided or planned. The total amount of human knowledge became too large for any single human mind to hold, and once that happened, it never went back. For most of human history, it was at least theoretically possible for one person to know everything that was known. Not everything in the world, not every secret of nature, but everything that humanity had figured out, written down, and passed forward. A single extraordinary mind could, in theory, contain it all. There's a word for people who attempted this, polymath, from the Greek, meaning having learned much. But the story of Thomas Young isn't just the story of a remarkable man. It's the story of a threshold, a moment in history when the project of knowing everything, a project humans had been attempting for thousands of years, finally quietly became impossible. And what that means for you, living in the most information-dense moment in the history of our species, is stranger than you'd expect. The man who knew too much. Thomas Young learned to read at age 2. By the time he was 6, he had read the Bible twice. By 13, he had studied Latin, Greek, French, Italian, Hebrew, Arabic, and Persian. Not as a party trick. He actually used them, reading original texts, corresponding with scholars across Europe, correcting translations that had stood for centuries. At 19, he was admitted to the Royal Society, one of the most prestigious scientific institutions in the world, based on a paper he wrote about how the human eye focuses light. A paper that turned out to be correct. In his 20s, he proposed the wave theory of light, the idea that light travels as a wave, not a particle. The scientific establishment rejected it completely. They were wrong. He was right. It took another generation to prove it. Then he moved on. He didn't spend his career defending the wave theory. He didn't form a school of thought around it. He simply moved to the next thing, because there was so much left. He contributed to the decipherment of the Rosetta Stone, one of the greatest cryptographic achievements in history. He developed a theory of color vision that still bears his name. He coined the word energy in its modern scientific sense. He made contributions to medicine, to Egyptology, to acoustics, to the mechanics of tides. And he did all of this as a side project. His actual job was practicing medicine. The historian Andrew Robinson wrote that Young's range of knowledge was so extraordinary that his contemporaries simply didn't know how to categorize him. He wasn't a physicist or a linguist or a doctor. He was all of them simultaneously and none of them completely. He died in 1829 at age 55, still working, still learning, still moving toward the next question. And the world he left behind was already becoming too large for any single mind to follow. The threshold. For most of recorded history, knowledge grew slowly. The Great Library of Alexandria at its peak held somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. That sounds like a lot, but modern estimates suggest a determined reader could have consumed its entire contents in a single lifetime. The Renaissance polymaths, Leonardo da Vinci, Francis Bacon, Gottfried Leibniz, operated in a world where the frontier of human knowledge was still, just barely, within reach of a single extraordinary mind. You could know what was known in mathematics. You could know what was known in natural philosophy. You could know the major theological debates, the key works of history, the state of medicine. It was hard. It required extraordinary dedication, resources, and intelligence. But it was possible. Then something changed. The printing press, invented in the 1440s, began distributing knowledge faster than any single mind could absorb it. The scientific revolution produced new discoveries at a rate that outpaced individual comprehension. Universities began dividing knowledge into disciplines, not because knowledge was naturally divided, but because it had become too vast for any single department, let alone any single person, to contain. By the time Thomas Young was alive, the threshold was approaching. By the time he died, it had been crossed. After 1830, no single person ever again made significant original contributions across more than 2 or 3 fields. Not because people stopped trying, but because there was simply too much to know in any one field before you could begin contributing to it. The era of the polymath was over, not with a bang, with a slow, quiet, inevitable overflow. What we lost. Here's what most people don't think about. When knowledge became too large for any one mind, something else happened. The connections between fields started disappearing. A physicist stopped knowing what a biologist knew. A historian stopped understanding what a mathematician was doing. An economist couldn't follow the work of a neuroscientist. And those gaps, the spaces between disciplines, are exactly where the most important discoveries tend to live. Thomas Young could see that light behaved like a wave partly because he understood music. The mathematics of wave interference in sound gave him the framework to think about wave interference in light. A pure physicist working in isolation might never have made that leap. Young made it because his mind held both things at once. Darwin's theory of evolution was influenced by his reading of Malthus, an economist. The discovery of the structure of DNA was driven partly by X-ray crystallography techniques borrowed from physics. The invention of the internet drew on communication theory, electrical engineering, and Cold War military strategy simultaneously. The biggest breakthroughs in human history almost always happen at the edges, where two fields collide in a mind that knows both of them. And we have systematically trained those minds out of existence. We tell children to specialize. We tell students to pick a lane. We build universities where a student can spend 4 years studying economics without taking a single course in biology or history or psychology. We reward depth and punish breadth. We call it expertise, and we are almost certainly paying a cost for it that we cannot fully measure, because the discoveries that never happened leave no record. The information paradox. Here's the strange part. You have access to more information right now than Thomas Young could have accumulated in 100 lifetimes. Every paper he ever read, every text he ever translated, every experiment he ever studied, all of it is available to you in seconds. And yet, you know less of the total sum of human knowledge than any educated person in history. Not because you're less intelligent, not because you're less curious, but because the denominator has exploded. In 1800, the total amount of recorded human knowledge, everything written down and preserved, could be measured in the millions of documents. Today, it is measured in exabytes. The human brain has not changed. The container stayed the same size. The water just kept coming. The result is a civilization that knows more than it has ever known, and understands less of what it knows than ever before. We have created a world so complex that no single human being can comprehend it, not even close. The financial system is too complex for any economist to fully model. The internet is too large for any engineer to fully map. The genome is too intricate for any biologist to fully read. The legal systems of most developed countries contain more laws than any lawyer alive has read. We built all of this, and none of us understands it. Thomas Young spent his life moving toward an impossible horizon. He never got there. Nobody ever gets there. But in the act of reaching across languages, across sciences, across centuries of accumulated thought, he touched things that specialists, locked in their lanes, could never have found. There's a researcher named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi who spent decades studying creative breakthroughs. His conclusion was straightforward. The people who changed their fields were almost never the deepest experts in those fields. They were the people who knew that field well, and also knew something else, something adjacent, something that didn't belong, and they were able to see a connection that no one else could. The last person who knew everything died in 1829, but the impulse that drove Thomas Young, the refusal to accept that any question was someone else's problem, the hunger to understand things that had nothing to do with his career, the willingness to look foolish by entering a field where he wasn't credentialed. That impulse is still available to you. You cannot know everything. Nobody can. But you can know more than one thing. And in a world of specialists, that might be the most dangerous advantage left. The world doesn't need more people who know everything about one thing. It has plenty of those. What it's missing, what it has always been missing, are the people willing to sit at the edges, to read outside their field, to ask questions they weren't trained to ask. Thomas Young didn't change the world by knowing everything. He changed it by refusing to stop at the edge of what he was supposed to know. That's still possible. That's still available. The question is whether you'll take it. If this made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. There's more on this channel worth knowing.